Somewhere in Australia, there's a pub that hasn't changed its carpet since 1968, where the barman knows every regular by name, every regular's drink by heart, and nobody, not one person, is looking at their phone. Where the servo on the edge of town still has a handwritten price board. Where the Saturday afternoon footy game draws half the town to a ground with no corporate sponsors, no digital scoreboard, and a canteen that sells meat pies for $2.50. These places exist. Right now. Scattered across this continent like something the modern world forgot to erase. While the rest of Australia tears down old suburbs to build apartment towers, while the cities get louder and denser and more expensive by the month, while everything turns into a brand or a sponsored experience, these towns just kept going the way they always had. And not because they couldn't change, because they didn't want to. And in 2025, as millions of Australians are quietly burning out on the pace of city life, on the traffic, the rent, the noise, the feeling that the country they grew up in has somehow become unrecognisable, these towns are starting to look less like relics and more like answers. Today, we're counting down the 10 Australian towns that still feel completely, unapologetically stuck in the 1960s. And honestly, they might be the sanest places left in this country. Stay with us until number 1, because that town's story will stop you in your tracks. And if you want more cinematic deep dives into the hidden corners of Australia that most channels completely miss, hit subscribe right now. Let's go. These aren't dying towns. These aren't museums with residents. These are real communities with real people, living at a pace and with a sense of place that the rest of Australia has largely abandoned. Here are the 10 Australian towns that still feel like they're completely stuck in the 1960s, counted down from 10 to 1. Number 10. Chiltern, Victoria. Number 10. Chiltern, the town the Hume Highway bypassed and accidentally preserved. When the main road between Melbourne and Sydney was rerouted in the 1960s, it skipped right past Chiltern. At the time, locals were furious. In hindsight, it was the best thing that ever happened to the place. Without the through traffic, without the truck stops and the fast food chains and the commercial pressure that follows a major highway, Chiltern simply stayed itself. At the main street, Connessa Street, is one of the best preserved examples of Victorian-era country town architecture in the state. The old Star Hotel, the post office, the former Bank of Australasia. They're all still standing, still in use, still wearing the same faces they've had for over a century. But it's the 1960s atmosphere, not the 1890s buildings, that catches you off guard. The pace of life in Chiltern is set to a different clock. The population is small, just over 1,000, and it functions the way country towns functioned before the internet, before drive-thrus, before everyone became too busy to stop and talk. The Lake Anderson walking track loops through bush that feels genuinely ancient. The town's artists and writers, the ones who've been quietly drawn here for decades, but give it a creative undercurrent you don't expect. Chiltern is what happens when progress forgets to show up, and everything it left behind is still there, intact and unhurried, waiting. Number 9. Balingup, Western Australia. Number 9. Balingup, the southern forest town that the hippies found in the 70s, and that's somehow still exactly what it was before they arrived. Balingup sits in the Karianjara country south of Perth, small enough that the main street takes 3 minutes to walk, and warm enough in human terms that strangers are greeted like they're expected. The town had a crafts and alternative living revival in the late 60s and 70s that brought artists, potters and smallholders into the surrounding hills. But unlike other towns that got absorbed by that wave and turned boutique and expensive, and Kotas, Balingup absorbed the newcomers instead. The result is a town that feels organically, unself-consciously itself. The total fire ban signs on the edge of town are hand-painted. The community hall hosts events that the whole district comes to, Not as a novelty, but because that's what you do. The old Balingup Hotel anchors the social life of the place in exactly the way country pubs anchored social life in 1963. The Jarrah forests outside town are the kind of quiet that people who've lived in cities too long have genuinely forgotten is possible. And driving into Balingup from Perth, past the suburbs that keep pushing further south, past the new estates and the roundabouts and the servo clusters, feels like crossing an invisible line into somewhere that never signed the contract with modern life. Number 8. Dungog. At New South Wales number 8, Dungog, the Hunter Valley town that tourism forgot, and locals have never once complained about that. Most people who come through this part of New South Wales are heading for the wineries. Dungog is the town they pass through without stopping. Which means it has remained, almost perfectly, the kind of place it was in the years when the timber industry that built it was still humming, and the Williams River was the centre of community life, rather than a backdrop for weekend kayakers. The streetscape of Dungog's main road is genuine mid-century country town. Not restored, not heritage listed into self-consciousness, just original. The buildings are old because nobody tore them down. The small shops are small because the town never grew past needing them. But what strikes you in Dungog is the absence of performance. There's no effort to attract you. No artisan coffee signs in the window, no chalkboard quotes on the footpath. The bakery opens when it opens. The pub fills up when the working day ends. The agricultural show is still the biggest event of the year, and it draws the whole district the way agricultural shows drew the whole district in 1961. Dungog is the rare town that hasn't been curated. It is simply, stubbornly, quietly what it is. In a country where authenticity has become a marketing category, that makes it extraordinary. Number 7. Cloncurry, Queensland. Number 7. Cloncurry. The outback town that the heat preserved and the distance protected. Cloncurry sits in the dry heart of northwest Queensland, roughly equidistant from nowhere, and connected to the rest of the state by roads that stretch ruler straight across a landscape so vast and red and ancient, it makes you feel appropriately small. The town was copper country. It was where John Flynn established the Australian Inland Mission that eventually became the Royal Flying Doctor Service. It holds the Australian record for highest recorded temperature, 53.1 degrees Celsius in 1889. And mentions this fact with a pride that is completely, endearingly Queensland. In Cloncurry, the 60s never really ended because the forces that ended them elsewhere, the suburban sprawl, the mall culture, the gradual homogenisation of Australian town life, never reached this far west. The main street has the bones of every Queensland country town from that era, and down to the wide verandahed shopfronts designed to deal with heat that air conditioning hadn't yet conquered. The pub is still the community's living room. The UHF radio is still how people communicate across the distances that separate stations. There's a toughness to Cloncurry that is deeply, specifically Australian. The kind that doesn't announce itself, that simply goes about the business of surviving in a landscape that doesn't offer much quarter. And that toughness has kept the town honest, kept it real, kept it exactly as it needs to be. Number 6. Beechworth, Victoria. Number 6. Beechworth. The gold rush town that history chose and modern life hasn't been able to dislodge. Beechworth is probably the most visually striking town on this list. The buildings are bluestone, serious, heavy, and built to last by people who intended to stay. And the main streetscape is so intact it has been used as a film location more times than locals can count. The precinct around Camp Street contains more historic buildings per block than almost anywhere else in regional Victoria. But Beechworth doesn't feel like a museum, which is the thing that separates it from a certain kind of heritage town that exists only for visitors. It feels like a place people live. The local footy club still trains on the ground where men trained a century ago. The families that have been here for 4 or 5 generations are still here. The Beechworth Bakery, yes, the famous one, yes, it's always busy, exists because the town had a bakery culture long before it was discovered, not the other way around. At the northeast Victorian countryside that surrounds Beechworth, the rolling hills, the old box ironbark forests, the creek lines that the goldfields followed, looks much as it did when Ned Kelly rode through it. And the town itself carries that same quality of deep, rooted, unself-conscious continuity. In 2025, Beechworth isn't just stuck in the past. It's one of the few places in Australia where the past and the present are genuinely living together without one apologising for the other. If this video is already making you want to throw your laptop in the back of the ute and just drive, you're not alone. Hit the like button right now. It helps this reach more Australians who are ready to see this country differently. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. We find the places most channels drive straight past. All right, well, 5 more towns to go, and the best is still coming. Number 5, Herberton, Queensland. Number 5, Herberton, the Atherton Tablelands tin town that time gently set aside and never came back. High in the ranges behind Cairns, where the tropical heat finally breaks and the air smells like wet eucalyptus and red soil, Herberton sits at nearly 1,000 metres above sea level and feels even further from the present than its altitude suggests. It was a tin mining town, one of the most significant in Australia's history. And, at its peak in the early 20th century, it was a substantial, ambitious, prosperous place. The ambition cooled when the tin ran out. But what was left behind is remarkable. A town of wide streets and old timber buildings, and a physical layout designed for a larger population that never quite arrived. And in that gap between what Herberton was planned to be and what it became, something unhurried and genuine settled in. The Herberton Historic Village, a collection of over 50 relocated heritage buildings assembled across 16 acres, is unlike anything else in Queensland. It's not just a museum. It's a reconstruction of an entire world that existed in this country before everything got standardised. But the living town around it carries the same quality. The pub, the general store, the community relationships, they operate on the logic of a smaller, slower, more connected time. Herberton is the kind of place where you stop for fuel and end up staying 2 hours, talking to someone whose grandfather helped build the road you came in on. That doesn't happen in the city. It barely happens in most country towns anymore. In Herberton, it's just Tuesday. Number 4, Silverton, New South Wales. Number 4, Silverton, the ghost town that refused to ghost. 25 kilometres northwest of Broken Hill, in a landscape so stark and luminous and otherworldly that Mad Max was filmed here, Silverton sits with the particular dignity of a place that has every reason to be gone and simply isn't. At its peak in the 1880s, the silver boom brought 3,000 people to this dust. When the ore ran out, almost all of them left. Almost. The few dozen people who stayed, and the few dozen who've trickled in since, drawn by the light and the silence and the particular freedom of a place with no pretensions, have turned Silverton into something genuinely strange and genuinely wonderful. The Silverton Hotel, opened in 1884, is still open, as its walls are covered with photographs and memorabilia, and the accumulated signatures of everyone who passed through across a century and a half. The town's artists, and there are real ones, serious ones, have been working in this light since the 1970s, producing work that could only ever have come from this specific piece of earth. But Silverton's 60s quality isn't just visual, it's social. The handful of people who live here year-round exist in a state of neighbourliness that has no modern equivalent. Everyone knows everything. Everyone helps with everything. The isolation that would feel like a prison sentence to a city person is, to these people, the whole point. Silverton is what's left when the world moves on, and a few stubborn, clear-eyed people decide to stay. What's left turns out to be something irreplaceable. Number 3. Dorrigo, New South Wales. Number 3. Dorrigo. The escarpment town above the clouds that the bypass missed and the developers never found. Dorrigo perches on the edge of the Great Escarpment in northern New South Wales, at the top of a road that climbs so steeply from the Bellinger Valley below that you arrive in a different climate, a different light, and what feels like a genuinely different era. The national park on the town's doorstep, World Heritage rainforest, waterfalls, a canopy walk that lets you stand level with 100-year-old trees, is spectacular enough that Dorrigo should by rights have been swallowed by the tourist economy long ago. It wasn't. And the reason is simply that Dorrigo is just far enough, just inconvenient enough, just quietly resistive enough that the full machinery of tourism and development never got full purchase. What remains is a town that still runs on the logic of its agricultural community. The surrounding country, a mix of rainforest fringe, dairy farms, and timber country, shapes everything. The Saturday market in the main street is a real local market, not a curated artisan experience. The conversations in the pub are about farm prices and rainfall and the road conditions on the plateau, not about property values and school zones. The air in Dorrigo has a particular quality, cool and damp and green smelling, carrying the edge of the rainforest into the town itself. Standing on the main street on a quiet morning, with the mist still sitting in the valley below, you understand exactly why the people here have never been in a hurry to change anything. Number 2. Longreach, Queensland. Number 2. Longreach. The Channel country town where Australia's mythology lives, and where daily life still honours it. There are places in Australia that mean something beyond themselves. Longreach is one of them. This is where Qantas was founded in 1920, in a corrugated iron shed at the edge of the aerodrome. This is the heart of the Channel country, that vast, flat, intermittently flooded inland sea of Mitchell grass, where the cattle stations are the size of small European countries, and the sky is so enormous it changes how you think about space. Longreach in 2025 feels like the 1960s in the best possible sense. Not because it's run down or left behind, but because the values and rhythms that defined Australian inland life in that era, the self-reliance, the community solidarity, the orientation toward the land and the seasons rather than the market and the screen, are still the operative values here. The Stockman's Hall of Fame is here, and it matters, but the living town is the real exhibit. The workers on the stations that surround Longreach still muster on horseback, as well as by helicopter. The pubs still fill at the end of the working week with people who did actual physical work. The stars outside town at night are the kind that make city people go quiet. Not 1 or 2 degrees of darkness beyond suburban sky glow, but true, absolute, overwhelming dark, with the Milky Way overhead like something impossible. Longreach doesn't romanticize the outback life. It simply lives it. And in doing so, it preserves something about the Australian character. The capacity for endurance, for horizontal solidarity, for making do and meaning it. That the rest of the country keeps trying to put in a museum rather than keep alive. Number 1. Ravenswood, Queensland. Number 1. Ravenswood. The town most Australians have never heard of. The town that might be the most frozen, most real, most quietly extraordinary place left in this country. 80 kilometres south of Charters Towers, down a dirt road that the bitumen gave up on, in the dry, sun-hammered country of the North Queensland interior, There is a town of under 200 people that has been doing the same thing in the same way for over 150 years. Ravenswood was gold. Wild, chaotic, world-class gold. Discovered in 1868 and pulling prospectors and speculators and desperate men from around the world to this remote corner of the colony. At its peak, Ravenswood had 32 hotels, a population in the thousands, and an ambition that seemed to have no ceiling. Then the gold ran thin. The people went elsewhere, and Ravenswood, instead of dying the way it should have, simply compressed itself to something small and permanent, and strangely proud. What's left is unlike anywhere else in Australia. The Imperial Hotel, still operating, still pouring beer, still the social heartbeat of the community. Dates to 1902 and looks it, beautifully. The courthouse, the School of Arts building, the old bank. They stand along a main street wide enough for bullock wagons, mostly empty in the middle of the day, shimmering in the Queensland heat. At the two churches still hold services. The school still runs. The handful of families who have been here across multiple generations tend the town's buildings and its stories with a care that is indistinguishable from love. But here's what stops you in Ravenswood. It isn't the heritage buildings, extraordinary as they are, it's the people. The woman at the pub who can tell you the name of every family that's passed through this town since the 1880s. The old stockman who drives in from his property on a Friday afternoon the way his father did and his grandfather before him. The kids who play in the wide red streets and know this landscape, its heat, its wildlife, its particular silence. The way city kids know their local shopping centre, except the knowing goes deeper, runs further, means more. Ravenswood is what Australia looked like before the Great Forgetting. Before the country decided that bigger was better and faster was progress, and the places that stayed small and slow and committed to themselves weren't worth paying attention to. Those places were always worth paying attention to. We just stopped. Across Australia, something is shifting. After decades of internal migration to the cities, after a generation of Australians convinced themselves that the future was urban and the bush was nostalgia, the tide is starting to turn. The pandemic cracked it open first. Now the cost of city living is finishing the job. People are looking outward. People are remembering that there is a country beyond the M1, beyond the ring roads, beyond the apartment towers going up on every former industrial site in every capital city. And what they're finding, when they really look, is that the Australia most of them grew up believing in. The country of front verandas and open doors and communities that looked out for each other. The country where the footy club was the centre of everything. And the pub was where democracy actually happened, and you knew the name of the person who served you because they'd been serving you for years. That Australia didn't disappear. It just moved to the places nobody was looking. These 10 towns held on to it. Some of them struggled. Some of them shrank. But they held on to the fabric of what community actually means, not as an idea or a marketing slogan, but as a daily practice. The specific, unglamorous, irreplaceable work of knowing your neighbours and showing up and staying. What the rest of the country is only now beginning to understand what it traded away to get here. These towns never made the trade. If this video hit something in you, hit the like button. It genuinely helps us reach more Australians who are ready to see this country differently. Drop a comment below. Which of these towns have you been to? Which one are you putting on the list? Is it the red silence of Silverton, the escarpment air of Dorrigo, or the end-of-the-road dignity of Ravenswood? Subscribe if you haven't. Turn on notifications. We go to the places most people drive past, and we tell the stories most channels never find. Australia is bigger and stranger, and more beautiful than anyone is giving it credit for. And we are just getting started.